It's good to be in the light. We were not at 9:30, in case you hadn't heard. I told someone I live a whole lot of my life in the dark, so that just sort of felt normal. Congratulations again on receiving your Bibles, and I pray it becomes a treasure that will be a light, a lamp unto your feet and a light to your path. So I apologize for my voice. Kim and I had a wonderful trip with a number of our church members. We traveled to Israel and Greece and Turkey and Rome, and brought home a little gift with us that made us feel pretty bad for a few days. So if Kim leaves, it's not because my sermon is terrible. It's because she's still coughing. So apologize for the scratchiness of my voice and that I'm a different octave this morning. We wrap up this morning our series, Mike Slaughter's little book, Dare to Dream. And Jim, thank you to Jim for filling in for me last week when we were under the weather. And Jim shared a wonderful quote with you that I've lived with all week long, and I invite you to continue to kind of reflect on. I dream of things that never were, and say, why not? Why not? Indeed, why not? If Easter is true, and we believe in a God who raises the dead, why not? Over the past 5 weeks, Mike Slaughter has urged us to consider the possibility that we all have a dream that God has given us, a mission, a vision for our lives, and that we're uniquely gifted to live into that dream, that vision, that mission. And as a way to begin thinking about that, Slaughter helped us walk through the life of Moses a bit, who fell from the halls of power and influence, became a shepherd, and in a burning bush moment was confronted by God's dream for Moses' life. The dream of Moses being the leader of God's people, Israel. And indeed, if God was with Moses, why not? We then saw Moses run through the litany of excuses as to why he was ill-equipped and ill-prepared, why God should choose someone else for this dream, this mission. I don't know about you, but there have been moments when I've thought about my own call and vocation and role within the life of the church, and I've thought God should just choose someone else. Feel ill-equipped, ill-prepared, not capable of living out the dream the way God has called us to. And quite frankly, the truth is, we are. We are ill-equipped and ill-prepared, and on our own, incapable of fulfilling the dream. That's because if it is a God-sized mission we're being called to, if it truly is a share in God's work of redeeming and renewing the world, then we're not up for that task, because that's God's work. And neither was Moses. Because if we can accomplish it on our own, then it's probably not large enough. And maybe not even from God. It may be good work, it may be important work. But if God is calling us to the work, if it is God's dream for our lives, then we need a little help. God must be with us. And thankfully, God is. And God is more than enough. God is calling you and me to join God in nothing less than transforming the world, than helping the world come a little closer to the kingdom in heaven, which we pray every week will come on earth. And the good news is that though we may not be up for that task, we may at times feel ill-prepared and ill-equipped, God is more than enough, as Moses would discover. We have everything right in our hands, all that we need, if only we'll lay it down and offer it to God God can do more with these lives than we ever might imagine. Indeed, God is with us. So why not? Why not live the dream that we're being called to? I hope over the past few weeks you all have maybe come a little closer to getting a sense of what God's hope and dream and vision and call on your life might be, how you're uniquely gifted to lean into that vision and that call. Maybe you can see it a bit more clearly. Maybe some of us are still trying to figure it out, and that's okay. As long as we're praying and discerning, then we're on the path. Over the years, I have to say, though, when I've suggested to some folks that God has a dream for their lives, a vision, a calling, a mission, and that they're uniquely gifted for that mission, a few, no one at Davidson, but a few over the years have said, isn't that the work of pastors and church leaders, church staff? I'll just lead my life and leave that kind of God-sized dream and vision and mission and calling and vocation to the professionals. I've had a few say that. And I've come to believe that posture or that attitude is maybe the greatest challenge facing the church. Our challenge is not a rejection of faith, that we'll just sort of walk away entirely from it. And our challenge is also not all of the things that the church likes to fight and argue about, as much as some might want us to believe that. Our challenge is what Jesus named back at the beginning. Our challenge is lukewarm faith. It's faith that's gotten watered down. A faith that's settled. A faith that's lost its sense of urgency, that what we are about here really does matter. It's a faith that reduces Christianity to just a kind of self-help technique to help us be a little better adjusted and help our families, our children and others around us lead a little bit better life. John Wesley struggled with that challenge as well. It's nothing new. It's been there from the beginning. It was there during Wesley's day. It was really his impetus for founding the Methodist movement, that he could see a church that was almost Christian. And he knew that God was calling the church to be altogether Christian. That the people around him had quite often a kind of outward display of religion, a thin veneer of faith laid over their otherwise very ordinary lives, and he knew that God was offering them so much more. That God was calling them to not be almost Christian, but altogether. For their whole lives to be consumed with the love of God. To live the abundant life that God was offering. To give themselves completely and fully to the mission, to the dream of a better world. And Wesley founded the Methodist movement to try to help folks not miss that. To see the treasure they were being offered. To invite them to not settle. And to take up the fullness of life that God longed for them to live. To join God in transforming the world and making it resemble more and more God's kingdom. Wesley dreamed of things that never were and said, by the grace of God, why not? Indeed, why not? It can be, as we go through the motions of faith, day after day and week after week and year after year, it's easy to settle for something short of being altogether Christian. We become comfortable, content. And like Moses, we often focus on what we lack and what we can't accomplish on our own and see only the mission and the ministry that's right in front of us, the limited mission and ministry that we can imagine for ourselves, and we miss out on living a life of biblical proportions. Mike Slaughter reminds us, Christ came in order that we might have life and life abundant. And so his invitation for us to seriously consider the dream that God has for you and for me isn't about making us feel guilty if we've settled, or if we've grown complacent or content, or if our faith has cooled a little over the years, but rather it's out of a sincere desire that we not miss out on the life we're being offered. A life that's larger than you and me. A life of eternal significance. A life that really matters. For most of us, the danger is not that we'll just outright reject our faith and walk away, but rather we'll live our lives and never really tap into the dream that we've been given. The mission, the sacred calling, the vocation. And lean into the giftedness that God has poured into us. That will never be fully consumed by God's love. Karl Barth, the early 20th century theologian, put it this way: when the gospel is offered to someone and he or she stretches out their hand to receive the gospel, the dream, the mission that God has for them, and they take it into their hand, an acute danger arises which is greater than the danger that he or she may not understand the gospel and may reject it. So greater than the danger that we might reject the dream, the mission, the calling outright, is that we might accept it and at once make ourselves Lord and possessor of the dream, thus rendering it powerless and meaningless, making that which chooses us something we have chosen, which therefore comes to stand alongside all the other things that we've chosen, and therefore control. Wherever the gospel is proclaimed, wherever the dream is offered, it's exposed at once to the danger of respectability. Respectability. We were in Ephesus, Kim and I and our group from the church community that Paul visited. They've excavated about 15% of Ephesus. It's remarkable. If you ever have the chance to go see it, go see it. About 15% of it. The crazy thing about Ephesus is, in the South, the joke is there's a church on every corner, which there kind of is a church on every corner. There is a shrine or a temple to some god on every corner in Ephesus. Everywhere you look, there's a shrine to this god or that goddess or whatever, every corner. And the crazy thing is, in the first century, Paul, a Palestinian Jew, with no power, no authority, no position, waltzes into Ephesus and says, "Let me tell you about the true God." It's remarkable. I have no idea how he did it, except he was altogether Christian. There was no lukewarm faith in Paul. He was fully consumed by the love of God. And he lived the dream. What Bart is trying to help us see here is that the greater danger we face as church when we're presented with God's dream for our lives is not that we would just reject it and say, "No, I don't want any part of that," but that we would accept it and then live as if we've chosen God rather than God choosing us. And if we believe we've chosen God, then we're in control. And we can go on living respectable lives because the dream so understood has no power over us because we control it. Paul was completely out of control, which is the only reason he could wander into ancient cities like Ephesus and say, "Let me tell you about a better way." The older I get and the longer I'm at this work of pastoral ministry, I don't want people to say when I'm done, "Well, he was a respectable person." I don't pretend to be anything like Paul, but I hope at least somebody will say, "Well, he did occasionally dream of things that never were," and said, "Why not?" Moses was a respectable person, had a good job, had a place in Pharaoh's court. He had position, power, authority, all the things that we might aspire to. But God was calling him to something larger, something more significant, something of eternal significance, to a God-sized dream Moses couldn't even see. And after his litany of excuses, he did eventually begin to lean into that dream, which is really all any of us can do anyway. Moses didn't know how it would all work out or which way the road would turn, and neither can we. But Moses did accept the dream, he welcomed it into his life, and he took a step of faith. And today we meet him towards the end of his life, standing at the summit of Mount Nebo with the dream of a promised land out in front of him. He dies before the people enter the land. At 120 years old, his eyes were not weak, his strength was not gone, until his very last breath firmly fixed on the dream, God's vision and mission for his life. As we conclude this journey through Mike's little book, I hope you'll take a couple things with you. One, we've said it a lot, and I hope you'll remember it. God has a dream, a mission, a call, a vocation for your life, and you are uniquely gifted for that. And the church needs you and your gifts. We are incomplete without you. Secondly, while I believe that, because I've experienced it, leaning into the dream can bring great joy and fulfillment and purpose, it also is not always easy. There are obstacles and struggles along the way. And the question is, what will we do when the road becomes unclear and the way forward becomes difficult? Moses had those moments. He had to go to Pharaoh 9 times before Pharaoh was convinced. The people griped and complained in the wilderness. They built a golden calf and started worshiping it. And yet for 40 years Moses persevered. Because as Slaughter says, saints are simply sinners who keep going. And the way we persevere is not mustering up some kind of superhuman strength, but rather maintaining a focus on the mission and remembering whose mission it is and by whose energy it's accomplished. That God is with us and God is more than enough. It's what Jesus means when he says, "The eye is the lamp of the body. Therefore, if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how terrible that darkness will be. No one can serve 2 masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be loyal to the one and have contempt for the other." Jesus here is speaking about the importance of maintaining clarity and focus, drowning out all the noise and the distraction, and keeping our eyes fixed on God's call and God's dream. We can't serve competing visions. One will suffer. Moses succeeded because he remained focused. He was able to persevere because he was clear that it was God's mission to which he was called. On our own strength, we won't last long. Perseverance means remembering who empowers the mission. We don't have to have all the answers at the beginning. We don't have to have a perfect plan before we take a step. Sometimes I think we fail to act and move forward with a sense of urgency because we want to make sure that we have everything in place before we take that step. And we do have to do our due diligence. We cooperate with God. We do our part. But if it is a God-sized mission to which we're called, God will give us what we need. The resources will come at the appointed time. Saints like Moses are not superhuman. They're simply people who stay focused on God's call. So why not? Why not? Why not a church devoted to beautiful worship, where hearts and minds are transformed by the knowledge and love of God, and people are inspired to give themselves fully and completely to the work of God and God's kingdom? A church where all are welcomed, where no one is turned away, where everyone's gifts are valued, where people connect and grow and experience abundant life. A church where people are fully alive, thriving, wholly devoted to God. A church where everyone matters, where each person takes the gifts that they've been given and lays them down as an offering to God to see what God might do with these lives of ours. A church that changes lives, communities, the world. God dreams, friends, of this church. And God is with us. So indeed, why not? Amen.